Welcome to the Bodhi Surfboard YouTube channel. We're up to stage number 5 on Jono's board. Today what we're going to be doing is squaring the rails, so using a flush cut or a laminate trim bit, which is a router bit with a little bearing on the end. I'm going to use that to remove the excess that's on the board and then use a belt sander to correct the shape and also to put the outline in. This is probably the most dangerous thing that we do. Because we use the router in a very unconventional way, and that we're actually looking over the top of the blade. The blade isn't hidden. So it is pretty dangerous. It's important to do it correctly. The most important thing is that we're feeding the blade and not generating too much heat inside the bearing. So the most important thing is a consistent speed and consistent angles, so you're not creating friction. We'll get into that, so we'll get started. Okay, so the next part of the process is actually squaring the rails up to get ready to put the So the next part of the process is to square the skirts up or the edge of the board to get ready so we can put the rail on. What we're going to do is basically trim off the excess in this next part and then get it ready for the belt sander, which is the true squaring and the shaping of the board. So when we do this part, what we're going to do is rest the board sideways on the table. So this is an old kitchen cabinet that I chopped up, but it creates a nice bench. So the most important part is your safety, and the thing that's going to keep you safest is making sure that the tool is working properly. The thing you don't want to happen is to build up too much friction in this bearing. If you do get too much friction in there, what it will do is dry it out. The friction will build up, the heat will build up, and if the heat builds up, this can explode. So if it explodes, it's full of ball bearings, and like I said before, we're using it in an unconventional way, so you'll be over the top, and the spray pattern is going to be vertically and horizontal, or basically vertically. So make sure you stay safe. Other ways to do this is that you could just trim it off with a saw, or you could use a hand plane to come back to the skirt surface. You just want to make sure that you're dead square, which is part of the next process. This is really just making it easier for the next process, so just removing the excess material. So you want to make sure that the blade is cutting through the deck depth, and that the bearing is running along the skirt. If this bearing for any stage, if you can just shoot down that way, Jono, if the bearing at all slips into one of these cavities, what will happen is that the blade will follow it through the board. So wherever your bearing is sitting is the guide for the depth. You can change it as you go along, just stay safe. So when you're staying safe, it's important to feed the blade, but don't force feed the blade. If you force feed the blade, it will choke, and that's not a good thing. If you underfeed it, it'll get hungry and hot. There's a couple of technicalities along the way, but we'll see if we face any of them. The most important thing is if you come to a grain structure that is pointing downwards into the board, you might hear it start to chatter. So it's more of a sound than a sight, and it will just be a change in pitch, and the grain will try and chase itself into the board. What we'll do is jump forward and cut backwards if that happens. What you can see up here, and what you might have heard, or I don't know if we're recording the sound, but what I heard is that it started to get a high pitch, what I call a chatter. So it was like it went from wah to wah. And what that is this grain structure here starting to vibrate. So as soon as I hear that, I stop. Now it's hit the cedar, and cedar's grain structure is different to the paulownia, so it does, I suppose, shatter a bit quicker. But what I'm looking at is where this grain structure is headed, and at the moment it's following the shape of the board, so it's okay. But if that goes inwards, it's going to put a split through your deck. What I'm going to do with this piece is go to where the end of the crack finishes and then cut backwards. Now in cutting backwards with the blade, it's a different pressure you need to put on it, and again you just need to just be careful. Okay, so the next part of the board is squaring the rails, or squaring the skirt so the rails will fit on. The most important part about this stage is that it's square. Now I like this stage when I'm in the workshop because anything that happens isn't my fault, and any instruction that I give isn't relative to me, it's relative to the table. So what we say is that the only two things that are true in this room at this stage are the square and the table and how they go together. So our job is to use the belt sander. Now again, you can use different things depending on what tools you've got, but we're going to use the belt sander to create a square edge on the rail. Now the reason that we're going to use the belt sander is because it has an engineered square base plate. So basically what Jono's going to do is become an extension of the tool. So his job is to hold this belt sander super duper square and create a nice smooth edge, which is square, determined by the square in the table. So not here, because that is obviously on an angle, but once it's sitting on the table, we'll find out where true square is. So in using the belt sander, the most important thing is that it's not rocked or rolled. Basically it's just kept square. Now if when you check the board, you have a look at it, and what you're looking at is that there's no gap between the top and the bottom. So this is a nice square edge. That if you look at this and you go, oh, the top's out, you don't want to hit it with the top of the belt sander. You just want to keep coming in square until it's correct. And so I'll do a couple of passes and then get Jono to start, and we're going to do a run along each rail basically to clean most of the mass off, and then go back again and refine it, and then put the nose shape in the board. Okay, so what I've done is basically just hit that with the belt sander. I didn't try and smash one part out. It was basically just a blending motion, so moving the base plate along. And what we're looking for, so we started with something like that, where you can see the size of the gap in the bottom. And the part that I've done is just here. Now, the reason that I like this part of the process so much is that it's always a learning curve. So what you might be able to see now is that there's a bit of a gap at the top. And what it tells me is that I actually hit it off square with the belt sander. So my job is to change my muscle memory and tilt it back 1/2 degree so I can continue. So this is okay, it hasn't gone through the layers of the ply yet. So there's still a couple of mil to play with, but it means that I know that I need to adjust to keep going. The more you check and reset yourself as part of the machine, the cleaner this process will be. If you think you know how to do it and you want to smash it out and then check, it's your choice. It really is. I would suggest do a little bit, check it, do a little bit, check it, and just keep refining your movement until you're square, and then your job is just to stay square. You don't need to keep adjusting. Okay, so the two things that you want to look at is basically the squareness to this edge, and once you've got everything pretty close to square, the next thing is the outline shape of the board. The outline is more important than the skirt. So ultimately, if you've got different flexes and twists in the frame because of rocker you've set into it, the outline will be more important than coming back to the skirt. And if you burn through the skirt, we'll just rebuild it, but we'll show you that process in a bit. Okay, what you might be able to see looking down here is that there's a bit of a change in the outline shape of the board. So the actual outline of the board is coming along this line, and it's got a bit of a divot through here. What we're going to do later is just rebuild that part of the wall so the outline shape is consistent. If the outline shape dips in or there's a divot, you won't have symmetry in the board and it's not going to ride as correctly as it should. What we're going to do now is do the nose shape, so we'll draw that in and cut it out and then re-block the nose and then show you how to repair things like this. It's a normal thing that happens, just with changes in rocker and just different anomalies in the frames when, well, not the frame's always the same, but just the way that it's laid up, so we just fix it as we go. So with all the frames that we create, they'll either come together with a pointed nose or they'll come together like the 9-footer with an open nose, and the reason for that is so we can actually put an individual shape in. So for Jono's board, he might want to do a bit of a snub nose or a bit of a retro nose where it's a bit of a pig look to it. But it's really up to Jono's eye, and what this does is allow maximum length in the board, which is about 9.3 or 9.4 off this frame. So what you want to look at, Jono, is you want to get that, and what sort of shape you want in it. So it won't be symmetrical. So the shape won't be symmetrical using the bendy ply, but it's a really good start. What we look at when we use the bendy ply is that one side will be better than the other, and once that side is cut, we'll create a template and mirror it to the other side. Do you know the shape? Yeah. So if you want to draw it in, and we can always draw more lines. So we just want to make sure that the base plate is square when we cut this line out from here, and the reason for that is that if we follow the deck profile, the blade is going to cut up and down, but it's going to cut up and down on an angle, so it can actually go into the shape underneath. So we just want to make sure the base plate is kept square. We've decided that this side of the curve is better than this one, so I'm going to cut along straight, come around and cut along this line, but leave it a little bit proud so Jono can clean that up with the belt sander. The most important thing for the next stage is there's a blend from the nose shape to the rail shape, so the outline is consistent. So you'll notice with any board that once a curve is started, it never reduces. That's not true. So if we go from the middle of the board and outwards, when you come outwards, the curve will only tighten. So there's no straight line on a surfboard. There'll be parts that look straight, but they'll be very gradual curves. We just don't want it to have a shoulder. You don't want it to come up here and edge. There'll be a natural progression into this curve, and that's the most important design aesthetic to look at when you do this. So we're going to transfer it back to the other table and just use that belt sander again to square this up. Once that's correct, we'll make the template and flip it and cut it. So the most important thing when we go around this corner is that we keep the belt sander nice and square. What can happen occasionally is that it'll lean over as you twist. So just small sections. I'll just start it up. So the most important thing is the flow of this line. Now, if you have a look from the side here, Jono, what's happened is that we've broken through the wall or the skirt of the frame. Now that's okay, but what we're going to do is rebuild it so we can pin into that later. But an important thing to factor in is that as soon as you go through this skirt material just into Polonia, the belt sander will eat this really quickly. So always remember that this only does what it's told to do, and if you use too much pressure, that's not the machine's fault and it's not the frame's fault. You just need to decrease your pressure. So what we're doing is correcting this shape, getting a nice line, and then what we'll do is we'll mirror that and fold it over. So what we want to do here is create a template of this side of the board. Okay, so what we want to do here is create a template of this side of the board so we can flip it and make sure that that nose shape is mirrored. As much as you might not be able to technically see it, your eyes will see that asymmetry, which is good through the tail of the board, but not so flash through the nose. So what I'm going to do is just line up a center point. So this is a tentative center mark through the stringer or the faux stringer on top of the deck. We've got a mark here, and then basically just use the edge of the pencil and mark it or score it. All that. All the way to the top of that nose part. Cut that out. This shape doesn't need to be exact. Again, everything is really a guide. Once you've cut it out and transferred that line, really it's up to you to use your eye to find the correct shape. Straight through there. Basically, we've just flipped over this template, we've cut it out and we've flipped it over. We've got a center line here. The edge of the rail will tip here. And then what we're going to do is just roughly trace that. Everything in the workshop's rough. Because the most important clarifier of whether it's correct or not is your eye, not the pencil line or not a measurement. It's whether your eye says it's correct. Unless it's on the table and then it's the square. Okay, so we'll cut out this shape and then refine it again. Now the most important thing when you're refining this one is that you've already come pretty close to correct on this side. So if you overshoot on this side, you need to correct it again on this side. So we're just slowly getting to the line. So we'll cut that out with a jigsaw quickly and sand it up. Okay, so again, we're going to make sure that this is nice and square. If we roll over that edge on the angle, the blade's going to cut underneath, so we'll keep it square. So the next thing that we're going to do is rebuild this nose. We've created the shape, but what we need to do is rebuild the actual wall. So when the rails go on, the first layer actually gets pinned into the board. So we use a staple gun basically to pin it in, and then the next layers will get pinned at the top and bottom and cut off. But to make sure that that wall goes on correctly, or the rail goes on correctly, we want to have nice strong bracing points. The absolute most important one is through the nose. So we want a piece of timber in here. It doesn't need to be super big, but basically it wants to be flush. If it is loose, the glue will actually drag it back into the board and you'll lose the effectiveness. So you want it to basically sit out proud of the line by, even if it's 2 or 3 mil, and then we'll clean that up later. So this isn't the perfect shape, but it's close enough for us to rebuild the wall and then correct it once all this is dry on the next stage. So what Jono's going to do is basically put a block here, and then maybe one across the front, and then the same on this side. So it's going to look like teeth through the front of the board. So we've just got little bits of paulownia. You can use pine. You probably don't want to use balsa because the pins just aren't going to bite in there. Yeah, so just nice light offcuts, and make sure that it's done correctly. That's the end of video number 5. So basically Jono's up to putting the rails on at the next stage. So squared everything off, got the nose shape in, put the blocks through the nose. I'm going to do a little bit of work just to get it up to where it needs to be. Jono's got a lot of commitments, and this is obviously us helping each other out to build the board. But there's a couple of things that I'll knock off through the week, and next time we come back we'll be putting the rails on. You happy with it, Jono?
So stoked.
So stoked. Alright. Make sure you subscribe and like the page, and share it to any of your scaling mates that are building boards. Once again, it doesn't matter where you get your frames. You don't have to do all the steps exactly how we do it. It's just a guide, and hopefully it gets you closer to building your own board and getting out in the water on it.